Thank you very much for coming by, Brian, for Liberty. I appreciate you stopping by. We are going to be talking about a couple of articles that I've come across that just kind of blew my mind. Kind of thought, you know what? We've got to start identifying when we're being directly misled, whether that is intentional or whether it's just out of ignorance. We have to start recognizing, hey, but this guy's saying doesn't necessarily make sense in terms of what's actually happening in the world. So this is an article from the Guardian, written by George Monbiot, Monbiot. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing that name. It's certainly not on purpose if I am. The U.S. Supreme Court is helping to destroy our climate, but it was a much smaller decision closer to home. That was the final straw for me. I don't care about the small decision closer to home that he's talking about. I don't. It's more of a European policy and issue that's going on in England, and I'm not that engaged in that stuff. But it's democracy versus plutocracy. This is the end game for our planet. So let's start by defining what these two things are, right? So a plutocracy is essentially a governmental system of governance run by the wealthy. And I think we all know what a democracy is, right? Majority rules, everybody gets a vote, blah, 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 blah. So he's saying that the Supreme Court's latest decision, it feels like the end. Here, I'll read you the first paragraph of the article. It feels like the end game. In the U.S. last week, let me just bring this up on the screen for those of you watching on YouTube here. I'll bring this up. So it's democracy versus plutocracy. This is the end game for our planet. It feels like the end game. In the U.S. last week, the third perverse and highly partisan Supreme Court decision in a few days made American efforts to prevent climate breakdown almost impossible. There's lots to unpack just right away in that first sentence. It feels like the end game, or in the first couple sentences. In the U.S. last week, the third perverse and highly partisan Supreme Court decision. Let's take that phrase apart. First, it's only perverse because you believe it's perverse. So if you're reading this as a Democrat or a liberal or as an environmental broad person, or, if that's your belief system, yes, this is perverse. And if it's not your belief system, it's not perverse. It's just a ruling. We use all this hyperbolic language because we want to evoke emotion. This is one of the big problems we have with our media right now. It's not that they're wrong or right. Most of this is a matter of opinion. Most of this, and we can argue all these different policies, all these different issues, from environmentalism and climate change to abortion to gun rights. We can argue all these things. But on both sides of the argument is just a set of differing beliefs. That's all it is. And all of this perverse and highly partisan, and we use all this language because we want to get people spun up and angry and that doesn't help further conversations. So the majority of these writers, the majority of people who are putting stuff out like this, these people aren't here to further the conversation or to help the cause. They're here to do what everybody out here is doing, and that is get clicks, get attention, look at me, look at me, look at me. And the best way to do that is emotion. And anger is a powerful emotion that makes you take an action and makes you click on stuff. So democracy versus plutocracy, we're going to throw that out as the title. And then we're going to talk about how right away in the opening, we're going to talk about how perverse and partisan the Supreme Court decision is, which is hilarious to me. The second part of this, the Supreme Court decision, is all highly partisan. If they had ruled in this person's favor, in the way that this person would have wanted them to rule, would then that decision have not been partisan? Well, of course it would have been it just would have been the partisanship that he likes, not the partisanship he doesn't. We have to unpack these things and think about them a little bit and go, you know what? Okay, here's a ruling that the EPA made. Now, look, this is the Guardian. This is an opinion piece. So, the hyperbolic language, I guess, I get it. This guy's not a news reporter per se. He's offering his opinion, so fine. But if in offering that opinion, the goal should be to further some level of conversation so we can have a conversation about this. And right away, he's saying, realistically, within my first paragraph, I only want people who agree with me to even bother continuing to read this. So I'm not trying to have a conversation with you or to try to change your mind or try to make you see my point of view so that maybe we can come together and coalesce around some solutions regarding climate change. I don't even care if you're reading the rest of this. I just want as many people who believe what I'm about to say to click on this, to share it, and to engage with this material. So anyway, Two sentences. I promise I won't take 10 minutes to explain every couple of sentences in this, so stick with me. It feels like the highly partisan Supreme Court decision in a few days made efforts to prevent climate breakdown almost impossible. Ruling in favor of the state of West Virginia, the court decided that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is not entitled to restrict carbon dioxide emissions from power stations. Now, listen, if you're on the left, if if climate change is a big issue to you, in that man-made climate change, I'm not here to argue that point. Yes, I can see this is a horrible decision, but let's go back to the title. All right. Democracy versus plutocracy. This is the end game for our planet. What the Supreme Court did here is the same thing the Supreme Court did in overturning Roe versus Wade, and that is to restrict federal power over the states. In my opinion, that is not necessarily in favor of the wealth. The less power that government has, and the more accountable it has to be to its citizens, then the less control that money should be able to have over how government makes its decisions. So let me break that down for a minute. Let me make sure we understand what I'm talking about here. It is very difficult to control your federal government, and it's even more difficult to control some random agency like the EPA and control these unelected officials who are entrenched bureaucrats who've been in D.C. forever. Giving the EPA power over these people in this agency, in this entity, aren't bribable. They're beyond, reproach. They are completely competent and benevolent, and therefore, even though they don't answer to voters because they're entrenched bureaucrats who don't come up for election, who don't answer to voters, they should be granted all this power. Or should West Virginia, should at least the people who are making these rules, should Congress at the very least have to do its job and actually write the laws that determine how much carbon dioxide a coal plant can? Why is the EPA doing this? Why is there another entity doing this? I look at all the insanely ridiculous, stupid, time-wasting, money-wasting nonsense that goes on in Congress. And I think, hey, maybe you guys could pass it. This is what they're supposed to be working on. They're going to have these January 6th hearings. I don't know how much money they're spending on them. And I don't care how much you hate Donald Trump. Nothing's going to happen here. You know it. I know it. This is political theater as we roll into the midterms. That's all this is. You know it. I know it. That's what's going on with the January 6th hearings. That's what they're doing because they've given their authority to actually govern away to the USDA, to the FDA, to the EPA. They're supposed to be the ones who are governing, and that's what we elect them to do. The Supreme Court is saying, look, you can create all these agencies you want, and the EPA may be able to track data. They may be able to report their findings, but they shouldn't be able to govern. That's not what the EPA is supposed to be doing. So, is it more democratic for our elected officials to have to make these rules, or is it more democratic for some agency to make these rules? I would argue that it's much more democratic for our elected officials to be required to make these rules and to take on that burden of that responsibility and to stop wasting their time doing stupid political theater and actually govern. But see, the problem with governing is you're going to have to make unpopular decisions, and they don't want to make unpopular decisions because their primary goal is to raise money and get reelected. That's why these other agencies exist. But anyway, the title of Democracy versus Plutocracy, all we're saying is the elected officials need to do their jobs. They're in charge of this. So let me scroll down here. There's a lot of stuff in here. His background. So here's another little paragraph that jumped out at me real quick. The Supreme Court ruling was neither random nor based on established legal principles. It arose from a concerted program to replace democracy in the U.S. with judicial dictatorship. It's the same thing with the Roe versus Wade thing. I think it was AOC goes on the air. I can't remember what show she was on. I think it was Colbert. AOC goes on the air and says that the Supreme Court is committing overreach in overturning Roe versus Wade. I'm not here to have the abortion. I've done 2 videos on the abortion argument. I'm not doing any more. Go check those out if you want my take on those. But she goes on and she says, I don't care where you stand on the abortion issue. When she says the Supreme Court is committing overreach by overturning Roe versus Wade, this is every bit as stupid as this paragraph saying that it arose from a concerted program to replace democracy in the U.S. with a judicial dictatorship. And I have a real problem with the far left. And I don't know if they're stupid or if they're intentionally trying to mislead people. Are they just ignorant, or are they intentionally trying to mislead you? Now, I look at an AOC, and this is not an unintelligent person. I would almost rather her be ignorant than to assume that she's intentionally trying to mislead people. Same with this guy, probably a pretty intelligent person who has to understand that what they're doing. With Roe versus Wade, the court essentially said, "Look, this isn't something that we should be deciding. This is a state's issue." That's not expanding judicial power. It's the opposite of a judicial dictatorship. When Roe versus Wade was passed, 46 states in the country had to change their abortion laws. 46 states had to change their abortion laws when Roe versus Wade passed. That's a judicial dictatorship. It doesn't matter. Now, take what you want and what you believe, right, and separate that from the definition of what a judicial dictatorship. You may want a complete federal protection for abortion. That may be what you want, but it's not the federal government or the Supreme Court is not overreaching and overstepping their bounds by saying we don't believe we actually have the authority to make this ruling, and that was a mistake. That's a reduction in judicial power and a return of power to the states. It's the opposite of a judicial dictatorship. In this circumstance, the judiciary is simply saying this federal entity, doesn't have the authority to dictate these policies. How is that a judicial dictatorship? The left is taking a return of power to the people. In both circumstances, the power goes from the federal government and from the judiciary back to the states. And in this circumstance, it goes from an unaccountable agency like the EPA, and the power has to go back to elected officials. And in both circumstances, the left is saying this is a dictatorship. These people are overstepping their bounds. This is a reduction of power. This is a reduction of federal control. This is putting power back in the hands of people. And this is what scares me, maybe, I think, about the left. Now, as a libertarian, I'll admit that I'm a right-leaning libertarian. I'm probably more sympathetic with, I don't even know if it's accurate, but I'm probably more sympathetic with the right than I am with the left. But when I say that, I probably mean the modern left, the screaming banshees on the left. I think that the left is allowing. There's extremists on both sides of this of the political spectrum in this country, but I feel like the left is allowing more of these people to speak on their behalf and speak for them. And I'm going to get into some of this stuff in just a minute. Some of the more extreme views that are really mainstream regular Democrats are supporting, but I wanted to jump in here because I just felt like this is incredibly misleading. So let me go on. And as Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has documented, hundreds of millions of dollars in dark money, funds whose sources are unknown, were poured in the nomination and confirmation of 3 judges appointed to the court by Donald Trump. Among the groups leading these campaigns was Americans for Prosperity, set up by the Koch brothers, oil tycoons with a long record of funding right-wing causes. As an investigation by Earth Uprising shows, there's a strong correlation. Now, this is a really stupid sentence. There's a strong correlation between the amount of oil and gas money U.S. senators have received and their approval of Trump's Supreme Court justice nominations. Yes, of course there is. Republicans are pro-energy and they're pro-oil. Now, you don't have to like oil and gas. You don't have to like the oil companies. You don't have to like oil and gas money flowing into campaigns. You don't have to like that stuff. But the sentence itself doesn't. Of course, there's a strong quote. This is a Republican. He's probably going to support less rigorous standards and vote for policies that are pro-oil. So that's whose campaigns we're going to fund. That's why there's a strong correlation between these two things. This is a Democrat. Guess how? There's probably a very strong correlation between Democrat nominees and the amount of money that's coming from George Soros and some of these environmentalists and left-wing, groups and organizations of people who are notorious for funding left-wing causes. So it's just kind of a silly thing to say, well, they're getting money from the oil. Well, of course they're getting money from the oil companies. That's their bit. That's who they're supporting. That's the horse they're backing. And your guys are taking money from other people, and they're all taking money from the pharmaceutical industries. But I guess we won't talk about that. But it's just kind of a silly little thing. There's a correlation between this. And of course there is. There's a correlation between that. There's probably a correlation between how they vote on gun rights and how much money the NRA gives them. If you're a Democrat who's anti-gun and wants to ban this weapon and that weapon, you're probably not going to get a lot of NRA money. And if you're pro 2A and you're like, no, we shouldn't be banning weapons and Second Amendment and gun laws are an infringement, yeah, the NRA is probably going to fund you, and there's probably going to be a strong correlation there. It's a silly. If you want to get money out of politics, hey, I'm all in. I don't like the Citizens United ruling. I hate that these people are able to buy politicians. I hate that. But just saying there's a correlation between this politician getting money from that group and that, well, of course there is. That's how it works. Anyway, once their favorite justices were in place, the same network started using their financial power to steer their decisions. They do so through amicus briefs, advice notes to the court, supporting plaintiffs' positions. Everybody does this. The left and the right both do this. And so, yeah, I'm with you. Let's get money out of politics, but stop writing silly things like, oh, there's a correlation between, yeah, of course there's a correlation. While some oligarchs lobby within the judicial system, others operate with great effect outside it, distorting public perceptions about such rulings through a barrage of propaganda in the media. No one arguably has done more to stymie effective environmental action than Rupert Murdoch. So let's talk about it. Some distorting public perceptions about such rulings, like saying that the Supreme Court is overstepping their bounds by reducing judicial power. That seems like it's misleading the people. That seems like one of the interesting things I've seen lately is all these abortion protests are taking place in cities and states where your abortion rights aren't even going to be impacted by this. There was not the federal government didn't restrict it. So there's this huge belief now that, okay, I guess now these entities are completely unregulated. No, they're not unregulated. These coal-fired plants, if you want to regulate them, you have to pass laws. Governance through third-party entities and regulations, to me, isn't constitutional. These are not my elected officials. If we're going to pass laws, we're going to pass regulations, we're going to fine people for doing things, that should be written in law. It should be done by the legislature, and the people who make those rules should be accountable to the voters. That seems like a very, very logical move, whether I agree with what they're doing or not. So I wanted to jump in and have that conversation. I saw this article, it just really got me going. I got a couple other articles here that I want to talk to, some stuff a little bit less serious. Okay, so I thought I would do something a little bit lighter here. This cracks me up. I love how entitled celebrities are, how insanely over the top entitled, the most privileged people to walk the face of the earth. And just how insanely privileged they actually are. Fed up, Deborah Messing says she got Biden elected during the White House call about abortion rights. First of all, Deborah Messing has not been particularly relevant in a long time. Will and Grace was a great show, but I mean, ask a 25-year-old who Deborah Messing is. I mean, come on. She got Joe Biden elected. Can we let's slow your roll just a tiny little bit there. So let's take a look at the article here. So the White House orchestrated a call with celebrity Democrats supporters amid the Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade, and it didn't go very well. According to a report from CNN, CNN, Deborah Messing was among the participants fed up about President Joe Biden's lack of urgency and the administration being unprepared despite weeks of warning. There's nothing really, despite the Supreme Court leak, there was really nothing that Biden could do. I mean, he's not an emperor. The Supreme Court was already selected. This was a case brought to the Supreme Court, not to sit here and defend Joe Biden, but what was he supposed to do? What, unprepared for what? Messing said, this is my favorite. Messing said she'd gotten Joe Biden elected and wanted to know why she was being asked to do anything at all, yelling that there didn't even seem a point to voting. My God, when these people don't get their way, it's like, it's a mind-boggling. We didn't get what we want. And I've done a couple of videos, and I actually, one of them, I released as the podcast here on this topic of abortion. And I'm like, all the Supreme Court really did was return the rights to the states. So you don't have to like it, but there's not a restriction here. There's not a law here. But anyway, she got Joe Biden elected. And like the level of self-importance for a quasi washed up star to say, I got the president of the United States elected. CNN cites three sources who describe the mood on last Monday's call as fatalistic, with many wondering why the call was taking place. White House aides co-organized the call with advocacy group Build Back Better Together. Here's an interesting thing. We just got done with this article where the author was talking about how the conservatives and will try and alter public perception of policies and da-da-da-da-da. That afternoon, participants received a follow-up email with a list of basic talking points and suggestions of Biden speech clips to share on TikTok, because the Democrats don't try and alter public perception. This is an attack on Democrats. It's just funny to me that the two parties are pretty much the same. As a libertarian, I'm like, look, there's some big, you look at like pro-life versus pro-choice. That's a major wedge issue. All right, fine. Gun advocacy, big difference between the Republicans and the Democrats and how they speak about gun rights. Outside of that, they both take money from big time donors. They both support printing tons of money through the Federal Reserve. They both have massive belief in foreign intervention and nation building. Like overall, they're pretty much the same. The reason abortion and gun control, they come up, look, like clockwork, right around election time, it's time to start having those conversations, because those are only the two things that they can stand in a room and argue about with any level of genuine, hey, we're very different. I mean, there used to be a pro-war left, but I think the Obama era kind of destroyed the mythology of a pro-war left. And so when I read things like this in the context of the last article I just discussed, and it's like the Republicans are trying to alter public perception, it's like, yeah, well, they both do that. These people are taking money from donors. Yeah, they're taking money from donors too. You just happen to support what they're taking money for. It's a calm down about how there's none of this insane moral high ground of this party is so righteous and this party is evil, and just stop with it. Anyway, sorry, I've got a little tangent there. But Messing is among many stars in Hollywood who've spoken out about the Supreme Court's ruling. Nobody cares, dude. Nobody cares. I like that the Hollywood stars are speaking out. Nobody who is pro-life gives a crap about what anybody in Hollywood has to say about anything. And they have to know this, right? Doesn't a Deborah Messing have to know? Like, here, join women. Let's read. Here's this tweet from Deborah Messing. Join women across the country for the national walkout protest. Go to link to see all the ways you can participate. This is going to accomplish nothing. It's going to accomplish nothing. This is an exercise in self-elevation. Look at me. Look at what I'm doing. This does nothing. What is the purpose of this? Go out and do some good for these women. Go out and do something for this is like the pro-choice version of BLM. We're going to go on marches and we're going to protest. What are you doing for the scared 19-year-old girl? Nothing. You're not. Are you fostering? Are you looking to adopt? Are you donating money to shelters? Are you reaching out? What are you doing for the scared 19-year-old girl because you care about women so much? You're not doing anything. So just stop. You're incredibly wealthy. You know what? Anyway, I get spun up on these things. Let's see. I don't know where this Messing also retweeted a message from the president telling the unemployment rate. And I did a little quickie on this on TikTok, but before it took office, 3,000 Americans were dying from COVID each day. 20 million Americans had lost their jobs. Can we unpack that sentence for a minute and recognize that the first year that Joe Biden was president of the United States, more people died from COVID than the last year of Trump's presidency. And Biden came into office with 3 vaccines in his belt. Or in his back pocket. He was ready. There were 3 vaccines ready to rock and roll when he rolled in. If 20 million Americans didn't lose their jobs, 20 million Americans were kicked out of work because we decided we wanted to shut the economy down. In fact, so many Americans lost their jobs that my predecessor became just the second president in history to leave office with fewer jobs in America than when entered. And he's just going to pretend that nobody remembers what the economy was like before COVID. Like we're going to ignore what gas prices were. We're going to ignore the booming economy. We're going to ignore all that stuff. I'm not saying Trump was good and he's responsible for that. I'm not saying Biden's bad and he's responsible for the other. But can we just pretend for a minute? Can we just step into reality and remind the president, just because he may not remember what was going on 2 years ago, and God, I really think that he may not remember what was going on 2 years ago, 3 years ago. The rest of America does, in fact, remember. So this article is just a little Hollywood nonsense about, like I said, it's mostly self-aggrandizing, look at me nonsense. I thought I'd take a quick look at that. Now we're going to talk about something a little bit more serious. It's the Don't Say Gay bill. And it's just interesting to me on this particular topic. One of the things that blows my mind on this is like, we're still calling it the Don't Say Gay bill. I mean, are we still, has that not been debunked enough? Or do liberals and leftists who support teaching gender identity to kids and teaching these things to children, they're just not going to read it for fear of going, you know what, this is actually pretty reasonable. And even though I hate this guy, this legislation is probably pretty reasonable. And so I guess maybe we should stop calling it the Don't Say Gay bill. The new Florida law dubbed Don't Say Gay by its critics kicked in Friday, banning instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in primary grades and creating fears that all topics related to LGBTQ people are off limits in public schools. Let me start by saying all topics related to LGBTQ people should be off limits in public schools. Okay, let me recant that a little bit. Once a child gets to a certain age, beyond adolescence, once they're starting to enter high school, the civil rights struggle of homosexuals is something that should be taught in classrooms, and why equality is important and why we don't segregate and why why individual liberty matters. The struggle of homosexuals in this country is a perfect example of why individual liberty is super important and why we don't grant separate rights to separate groups of people. So yeah, we should teach this stuff, but I think we all know that teaching this to children 5, 6, 7, 8 years old is insane. State leaders dismissed those complaints, saying the law, officially known as Parental Rights and Education Act, or HB 1557, has been the subject of fear-mongering. It does not attack gay or transgender students, employees, or parents. The law's goal is to limit instruction on those topics in the earliest grades, leaving that up to parents, and to make sure that such lessons are age-appropriate in older grades. But an Orange County Public Schools workshop on the new law held last month, one that district attorneys admitted caused more confusion than clarity, showcased the worries many educators have about the new legislation. This is what gets me. This is one of the big arguments from the left on this Don't Say Gay bill, is that it's basically making something against the law that was already not a thing. Well, if it was already not a thing, why is everybody so mad about it? If this was already not a thing, why is the left so angry that they're not allowed to do something that they were already not doing? It's basically making something against the law that was not already a thing. If that was the case, then what's the outrage? What you're saying is that we are not and have no intention of teaching this thing to younger children. If that's the case, then who cares about the bill? I don't know. Whose confident elementary school colleagues never provided lessons on sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, here's the interesting thing. She is a veteran high school teacher in Orange County whose confident elementary school colleagues never provided lessons on sexual orientation or gender identity. She may be 100% right. Every single one of her colleagues and all the schools that she knows, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the number of elementary schools in the state of Florida, let alone the rest of the United States, right? She doesn't know. I don't know how many teachers there are in Florida, but there are thousands. She knows how many, 10, 15. So maybe she is very confident that the people she knows aren't teaching this. But the point is that the state is saying, we don't want this. This is not education that we believe is appropriate for young children. We just want to make sure and write and codify in law that you're not going to have these conversations with young children. This is not crazy stuff, folks. This is not extremism. This is not transphobic. If you can't get behind the idea that maybe it's not appropriate for my 7-year-old kid to learn about sexual orientation and gender identity at 7 years old from a school, you're the extremist. Sorry. This is the problem I think that the Democrats are having. And I brought this up before in other conversations I've had. I brought it up on Twitter. You're letting the extremists speak for you. I don't think most Democrats want their kids. Most of the Democrats I know are not represented by the extreme screaming banshees that we see on TV, the extreme voices that get elevated by the right for media purposes, I will say, right? That's not your run-of-the-mill average Democrat. I think your run-of-the-mill average Democrat, they might believe in a bigger role for government in our economic system. They might believe in universal health care, and there are arguments to be made for their economic beliefs. I may not agree with them, but they're not crazy people who want to groom children, but they're letting crazy people who want to groom children speak on their behalf. It's kind of like when Trump got elected. They said, "Oh, well, you may not be a racist, but by voting for Trump, you're saying being a racist wasn't a deal breaker," right? Does that make sense? It's the same thing. If the Republicans voted for and elected Donald Trump, then you're letting, whether you believe what Donald Trump believes or not, you were letting him speak for you. That was your inference. That's what you were saying there. So if you're going to be mad about this bill and shout it down, or let the more extreme members of your party do it and speak on your behalf, then that's not a deal breaker for you either. In her view, the law's real goal is clear: hostile signaling against the LGBT community. What? And listen, this is a teacher. This is an educator. So the idea that here comes an educator saying something like this, and you're like, well, you're kind of arguing against yourself here a little bit. You think that this bill isn't, you read the bill and what it says, and then come back here and tell me that this is somehow hostile to LGBTQ people. That doesn't make sense. You're kind of making it sound like you want to teach this stuff, or you want this stuff taught to kids, because that's all the bill says, is you can't teach this stuff to kids. So anyway, there's the other part of this is again, like I said earlier, is just making something against all that was already not a thing. So let's take a interesting look. Illinois school district. Now this is Illinois, not Florida. And like I said, this woman says that the colleagues she knows are not teaching this. I have no reason to not believe her. I also, like I said, that's kind of anecdotal. She doesn't know a great high level, the majority of teachers there. She does not know. She may know a few, but she does not know the majority of them. She does not know the curriculums in every classroom in Florida, so she can't speak on behalf of the entire. But the argument is constantly from the left that these kinds of laws don't need to exist because it's not being taught. And here we go. Illinois school district unveils curriculum teaching preschoolers about sexual orientation and gender identity. Okay. This is from Fox News, so it must be lies. It's probably just lies, right? Because it's Fox News is saying it. And so immediately I'm going to discount it. And this is the problem. This is part of the problem with public discourse in this company. It's like, or in this country. It's like, Fox News said this, so it must not be true. They must be lying. So let's take a look. Let's see. Pre-K week at a glance. So this is all right. So this is a curriculum for preschoolers is what this is. This is a curriculum overview. Students will learn, this is pre-K. Students will learn about the purpose of flags and will learn about the pride flag. Students will focus on 2 colors, their meanings and interpretations a day. Students will make a class flag as well as individual flags. So a lot of this stuff seems pretty innocuous when you look at it. What is a flag? What are they used for? Can you name any flags? So all of the stuff that's on the on this little curriculum here, you go, well, they're just teaching about the pride flag, and that's all they mention here, which is very interesting, right? They're just talking about what the different colors mean. But then when you go to, you got to dig a little bit deeper here. This is off of you can go right here. This is docs. This is the, hold on, sites.google.com. This is district65.net. It's their public, their deal here. there. So this is for the school. You can click on it from the story here. This Illinois school district is having schools teach about. So it's in this. It's linked right to the schools. This is from the school, District 65. You click on the links, right? And so then I clicked on lesson plan, right? So here's the lesson plan. And so now let's get into the vocabulary: flag, gay, lesbian, non-binary, queer, community. That's the vocabulary. So this stuff isn't being taught? Yeah, it's being taught. There is an agenda here to teach this. This is what bothers me. I was having a conversation with someone about this the other day. And I was talking about Pizzagate. Remember Pizzagate and QAnon and all those crazy conspiracy theories about, just crazy stuff about, horrible things that the far left was doing, baby. I mean, this was just terrible. I'm not even going to repeat it here. QAnon, Pizzagate, look it up. Really, really out there conspiracies about child trafficking and just horrible, just ridiculous stuff. And I was thinking back and I'm like, all that stuff came out like not too long before the Epstein revelations and the Epstein trial and all that stuff took place. And I was thinking about how conspiracy theories work and why we do these. If you think back in the history of conspiracy theory, it's a CIA term to throw people off the scent of actual things that are happening. And you think about all the horrible things that we now know and accept that the government has just done in the past. And then you look at this crazy ass conspiracy theory that came out. And then you have this multi-billionaire with incredibly high connections to politicians, to the royal family, to famous people, wealthy people, powerful people. And if you talk about that, the way to dismiss that conversation is, well, QAnon conspiracy theory, Trump supporting QAnon conspiracy theory person. And that way we could just disregard that. Epstein didn't kill himself. And the thing that gets me is, where's the client list? Like, nobody's asking the question, like, where's the client list? These people were convicted of sex trafficking minors, right? Where's the client list? Who are they trafficking these people to? And you talk about it. It's a crazy, and now we do the same thing with this educational stuff, right? It's not being taught. You're crazy. We talk about grooming children. You're a QAnon conspiracy theorist. This isn't happening. It's not happening. And all you have to do is go online, couple of clicks into a school district's lesson plan, and it's right there. So it's right there. It is being taught. So they're lying about whether or not it's being taught. If it should be taught, then stand up and say, we should be these are the lessons plans, and this is what we should be teaching our kids, this stuff, and put it on the news and sell it and be honest about it. You know that the majority of people who vote blue don't support teaching this stuff. This is a preschool. Let me bring this back up. This is a vocabulary: flag, gay, lesbian, non-binary, queer. That's vocabulary for preschoolers. Stop telling me this stuff isn't being taught. And the reason you're saying it's not being taught, and the reason you're not talking about this, the reason you're doing everything you can to label this bill as transphobic, anti-gay, which it is not at all. All this bill says is we shouldn't be teaching this stuff to little kids. The reason you're so adamant, you have to label it as the Don't Say Gay bill, and you have to say that these things aren't being taught, is because the majority of Democrat voters don't support this crap. There's no way they do. So you have to pretend like it's not really happening. And it is. And this is the problem I have with the Democrats is I'm like, listen, stop letting extremists take over your party. These are your extremists, right? If the right's got extremists, then you do too. And these are your extremists. And this is the kind of stuff that they're doing. So anyway, the story of Harvey Milk and the rainbow flag, I didn't look into that book, but I just wanted to touch on this. It's a little bit more serious stuff. Just remember that the stuff is being taught, and the Don't Say Gay bill is not Don't Say Gay bill. So I wanted to touch on those things. Thank you very much for stopping by, Brian for Liberty, and we'll see you next time.